Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to 22 Panels. My buddy Mark Pracht is here to help me with my wonderfully illustrious, like one of my one of my desert island guests. Matt Madden has joined us tonight. I have like a weird um thankfully, actually, I discovered you late. I think I was already doing the comic or the podcast when I really discovered you. I knew your name but hadn't really read anything before then because you work with form in a way that I don't think I appreciated before I was doing the podcast and talking to creators and whatnot. So I think there's a really good chance that if I'd read like Ex Libris or 99 Wiz Tell a Story or whatnot 15 years ago, I would have gone, what the hell is this? um, but
Although
now
the
it
fact that
just
you called this
fascinates me.
podcast 22 panels suggests that you are interested in
I
kind
no,
of behind the
I'm
scenes and the
incredibly
form of
interested behind the
storytelling.
scenes
So
and yeah, the storytelling, but I'm also very much a word person. I think in words, not pictures. So forever I like undervalued the hypnotic nature of the art and the comics that I
mm,
loved. I gave way, I mean, and I don't want to take away from the credit that I gave writers because I still need a well-written comic. Um, but I'm much better at picking apart why something works for me now than I was even 5 years ago. Um,
yeah, well, it's a
and
challenge. It's a strength and a weakness, I think, of comics that they do rely on these two very different modes of expression. And there are people who read comics purely for the writing.
right.
And I think that's okay, especially when you have a really good writer like Alan Moore or whatever. But on the other hand, the art is also very attractive or repulsive. There are cartoonists that I really admire in theory, but I just, I can't read it because like the art doesn't jive with me for whatever reason. And I'm always playing around with different styles, and I feel like there's so much possibility in that kind of graphic plasticity that comics has. You can draw one comic in a totally different style. You can use different kinds of colors. There's just a vast, you know, uh, toolbox available to you. But at the same time, it makes it harder for people to figure out what you're trying to do and kind of I mean, you read Ex Libris, so that point, every three
Mhm.
pages, it's like a different drawing style.
Right.
And I think it's fun. I think it's great, but I do think
Oh
it's
no, I
it can be a
adore
turn
it.
off, not even a turn off, but just like it makes it harder to enter for some people, I think.
I think we even had a couple people who were on that episode that didn't get it until Mark and I started talking about it. And that's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed doing book clubs on comics, particularly the ones that I don't necessarily get but people love, is that when you start talking about them, it's like, oh, I didn't see that.
Mhm. Sure.
Because we're drawn in different directions with where we look at a page or how much time we spend with it. Um, so I'm actually gonna I deliberately didn't like do as much homework on your history as I maybe could have. I know basics. I know you teach comics. I know you're married to Jessica Abel. I know your work. Um, because I wanted to be able to explore in like a curious way because most people who come into comics is because they love one comic or another and they just have an absolute drive for storytelling. So I'm assuming and you can correct me that at least the genesis of your personal story starts there, but you also seem to have reached a point where you're as interested in how to tell the story as the story being told. And I'm really curious as to what that journey looked like.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I almost even the way I discovered comics made me curious about the different ways you can tell stories with comics because I didn't have the typical American fanboy, just growing up reading lots of superhero comics and being very focused on that. I read superheroes a little bit. I read newspaper strips. My parents had some, New Yorker cartoon collections lying around, including the great Bernard Cliben, who does the cat books and like never eat
Mhm.
anything big in your head. Very, pretty age inappropriate stuff that I was looking at when I was 8 years old and really enjoying. And then as I got older, I discovered And I'm 56, so we're talking like mid 80s. I was getting into kind of the first wave of heavy metal and like National Lampoon when they
Okay.
used to run comics in there.
Right.
A certain point, I started becoming aware. That's when mid 80s is when, well, a lot of stuff happened. That's when, Watchmen and Dark Knight came out. It's
Right.
when first started
Yep.
appearing in the hardcover collection. And through Mouse, I became aware of Raw
Raw.
magazine, and I was able to uh, find. Actually, I only have one of like the original oversized, famous runs that are very hard to find and expensive on eBay
Yeah,
now.
the only one I have is the narrative corpse, the last one they
Okay,
did.
yeah, which was done later on.
Yeah.
The one I have a good story actually because it was an issue called it was number 6, I think. It's from like the early 80s, and it's called each raw full issue had like a sort of subtitle. It was always like,
Right.
postmodern comics for damned intellectuals and things like that. And
Right.
this issue was called the Torn Again Graphics magazine.
Oh,
And the cover was like a sort of collage done by Spiegelman, and maybe it had some Gary Panter drawings in there, all kind of like jumble of like Nancy and Popeye and all these different comic
huh?
characters. And I found it in a used bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the top cover was the corner of the cover was torn off. And so I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, this is really cool. And I brought it up to the counter, and he's like, yeah, this is really rare, but I'm going to give you a discount on it because the cover's torn. And he sold it to me for 20 bucks or something. And I got home and was looking at it when I realized that on the inside, there were a corner of the cover was taped
Uh-huh.
into the
Uh-huh.
front page of the book. And that was a deliberate thing. And not only
Brett,
that, I learned
Brett.
later that what they did was they printed the whole print run. Then they had a big pizza party. Well, probably not pizza. Pretzels, I always say, are the great comics treat because they don't leave any oil anywhere. But they
Right.
got together in New York and tore the corners off of the entire print run and then jumbled them all up and then taped the wrong corners into all the
Uh-huh.
different books. So every
Uh-huh.
book in that print in
Uh,
that issue number 6 had a torn cover with the corner in there. But if you tried to tape it out and tape it back on, you would find it
I
doesn't
can
actually.
say with certainty because I recently saw pictures that there was beer at that party.
Okay.
I don't know what they ate, but Francoise Moulet was at Cartoons Crossroads this year.
Mm.
And that was one of the stories she
Oh,
told
cool.
in
Great.
her talk on Sunday morning.
Yeah,
So
I
as
do. I
soon as
think
you
I've seen
said
that
there was
photo
a
actually.
torn, as
Yeah.
soon as you said the torn cover, I'm like,
Uh,
oh, I know that issue. And then you started telling the story. I'm like, okay, I got to let him tell the story.
yeah. So that was
But
yeah,
yeah,
that's
no,
the
that was
used
a
bookstore,
right.
10 years later story. Um,
Yeah, no, the fact that it still had the torn cover in it or
yeah.
torn corner in it actually means that he should have charged you
Oh,
way
absolutely.
more.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So there was that stuff going on, and then at the same time is like the kind of revisionist superhero stuff and Mouse. That's also when a lot of the early newspaper comics like Crazy Cat and Winsor McCay's work were getting rediscovered. And I remember being in like upstate New
Dennis
York and just
Kitchen was
randomly
starting to put out
finding,
like
sorry,
Steve Canyon, and I said
yeah,
Dennis
and
Kitchen was
starting
bringing
to
a lot of
sure all
stuff
that
back.
stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember just randomly finding in the paper an ad for like a Winsor McCay original art exhibit in upstate New York, and like an hour from my parents' house. So I went and saw that.
Right.
Um, I grew up in Connecticut near Rybrook, New York, which is where the
Okay.
original comic art museum, Mort Walker's collection was,
Okay.
which
Okay.
now has kind of it ended up in Florida for a long time, and then in storage, and then I believe, pretty sure it was recently acquired by the Billy Ireland
Yeah, I
collection
was about to
in
say.
Columbus.
I
Yeah.
think Billy Ireland has at least a lot of it
Um,
now.
but the Cartoon Art Museum, I'm not sure if that's actually what it was called, but it was a Cartoon Art Museum in Rybrook, New York, about an hour north of New York City. And it was an amazing place because it was like an Addams Family mansion,
Oh
just in
wow.
well, more like the Munsters even, because it was a little bit run down. And you could just show up there. And there were like, remember in the 70s in the strip malls, you'd have like rock, they still have these like, rock shops where you could get rock posters and those sort of like sliding, giant hanging poster
Right.
frame things
Right.
that, but he just they bought a bunch of those things, just kind of like floppy things, and they'd have like original George Harriman and Winsor McCay and Milt Caniff full pages just kind of plopped in there behind
They
Mylar and
actually
stuff.
had Windsor full kit pages. One of the cool things that they showed me when I toured the back room of the Billy Ireland once. And Caitlin went out of her way to point out that they'd had to Windsor's kids were didn't really appreciate their dad's art, were all about getting the money. So
Mm.
they didn't sell pages, they sold panels. So
Mm.
so to have a whole
Really?
page, you have to have like managed to reacquire the separate panels and piece them back together. I mean, if you look at some of the pages they have, it's like each one of them has razor cuts
Oh,
between
wow.
them
I
as
didn't
they've
know
been
that.
put back together. Um, which is cool that somebody managed to go do that, but
Yeah.
also
This one managed to get them all back together. That's pretty impressive.
horrible how many pages might be out there in pieces, and or the pieces got destroyed individually because people didn't think anything of their
Who
one
knows?
little
Yeah.
panel. Right. Right. So,
Yeah, so I kind of like in the course of 5 years, I really had my mind blown because I just like it felt like every few months I would discover some new aspect of
new
comics
aspect. Okay.
that just blew my mind even more than the last one. So, um, and then the final at
Give
this
me
point,
give me a couple of examples of the big ones that like really resonated with you, that blew your
well,
mind in there.
definitely finding the uh, the first there was kind of like a paperback collection of Crazy Cat and kind of a
Okay.
biography of Herman called Crazy Cat: The Art of George Harriman. Actually, Patrick McDonnell of Mutts was one of the three authors of this collection, and it was
Right.
really the first time I'd ever heard of or seen Crazy Cat. And that book really changed my life. It remains probably my single favorite work of comic art is George Harriman's Crazy Cat. Um, and
You
around
and
the
Bob
same time, I
Sicoria.
found this like in a Walden Books, a really ancient
Okay.
bookstore, mainstream bookstore chain, and where I also found right on the shelf, not behind a counter or anything, and published by like a major publisher, a collection of early Robert Crumb underground comics called Head
Oh,
Comics.
nice.
That was like
Nice.
that you couldn't publish that today and just put it on the bookshelf and not get sued for it. It's like really hardcore stuff from the first 5 or 6 issues of Zap comics. And I'd seen a little bit of Crumb, but I was getting that really dose of the really psychedelic, really raunchy early Crumb was really impressive as well. Um, and I liked uh, Watchmen and the Dark Knight stuff, and I read those a bunch of times, but they didn't sing me the same way as the more kind of indie offbeat stuff did. So
Right.
Mouse was big, and then once I got the Read Yourself Raw collection, which was in the oversized format, but was sort of a collection
Right.
of the earlier issues, and started and first saw some of the more modern European and South American artists like Munoz and Sampaio in particular, really blew my mind. And stuff that like really turned me off at first, like the Jerry Moriarty, who I got to know in later years. He and I taught at School of Visual Arts together in the 2000s. Had this series called Jack Survives, which has been reprinted a few times in recent years. And they're these like chunky kind of Edward Hopper look. It's like if Edward Hopper got drunk and made comics, is kind of what it looks like. Very kind of like chunky, but in this very Americana. And they're sort of
Okay.
like fanciful vignettes about his dad, Jack, who was like an insurance salesman, just like all American, kind of like buttoned down, strong silent type, American dad. And they're clunky and weird and like a little bit off, everything's a bit off center and stuff. And my first time I read it, I was like, what is this? This is like really amateurish. I don't like this at all. And like I kept on coming back to it though. And that again, another one of I think one of the pinnacles of American comics is those Jack Survives strips, pages and short comics he did back in the I guess in the early 80s, really mostly.
Looks like there is a full color edition available. $60.
Hmm.
Looks nice. Though I can absolutely see how it would initially turn you off because I mean, I've spent enough time around comics that I see something like this, and before I think it's sloppy, I want to see if it's repeated.
Right.
Because I sit
Yeah,
there going, wait a
intentionally,
minute, no, if
exactly.
you
Yeah.
can manage, if you can do this page after page, this
Yeah.
isn't sloppy, it's a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No,
then I
Jerry's
start
like,
going,
he's a trained painter and he was very
right,
deliberate in his strategies of like he didn't use any kinds of photo reference or anything. He would just draw directly on the page. And so partly you're just seeing him building up these drawings, sometimes with like ballpoint pen and like random materials.
well, I'm
Um,
just looking at the cover here, and it's making me. There was a panel I went to at CXC this year where they were talking about working in colored pencil, and the two people who worked in colored pencil, one of the things that like came out was that like the most unrealistic thing about comics is the outlines. We don't have
Mhm.
outlines in real life. The color just
Sure.
kind of defines itself. So when you work in colored pencil, you can draw in such a way that you don't have outlines. You're
Mhm.
just, and as I look at the cover, that's what I'm noticing. You don't have, you've got heavier lines to delineate like corners in terms of depth or whatnot, but it goes
Yeah.
from brown to blue for the shirt. There's no inking in between to indicate that this is where this is and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean his
Um,
color stuff is like that, and almost like flat fields of color. And he has
right.
done. He's still working. He did a book that I thought was quite good and a little bit overlooked about I think about 5 years ago called Pain Tunist. That were kind of more. They're much more gauzy and color and like ink wash or pencil drawing based. But the actual Jack Survive comics though are very chunky black and white drawing, line drawing, and partly it's like sometimes they were drawn with pencil and ballpoint pen, but like
Okay.
they were shot by a photostat camera and turned into like this harsh, high contrast black and white. Um, and I think it looks great, and I love that kind of washed out, chunky look
Yeah.
of really bold black and white comics. And that like that as much as anything else was a big influence on me as a budding artist when I was trying to figure out what
Right.
kind of drawing I wanted to do.
So you
Um,
said you were born in 56. I'm a
no,
math
68.
guy. So
I am
68.
56.
You are 56.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes way more sense. So this is when you're like late teens.
Yeah.
Late teens is the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you already decided that art was what you wanted to do?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
No, I was studying. I was kind of in a language. I was in college. I was studying. I mean, in high school, I was aimless. I didn't. I mean, I played guitar a lot, and I kind of wanted to be a musician. But I started getting sidetracked by the comics, and just started drawing them for fun. But I've drawn sort of off and on my whole life, but I basically consider myself to be like a doodle school of art kind of artist, where mostly what I learn is just by doodling in the margins during class, and then later like
Okay.
copying other artists' drawings and sort of figuring out stuff as I went along. And pre-internet and everything. So like whenever you'd meet another cartoonist or someone into comics, you try and find some little, kind of thing about like how do you use white ink or like what's a lettering guide? Like, you piece together these little bits of information. Which many years later, Jessica and I were able to put together into the two textbooks we did for first, second, drawing words and writing pictures and mastering comics. But that's jumping
Which
way
are,
ahead. But when we
yeah,
were learning, one of
which are
the reasons we wanted to do a book
gold
like that is
standard.
like,
We'll,
I mean,
we'll toss
there's a
that out
real
right now. Gold standard. Whether you want to learn to make comics or just understand comics better, I at this point, people who want to get into comics, like the curriculum I'll give them is their 100 level textbook is understanding comics. Their 2 and 300 level textbook is drawing words and writing pictures. And like if they want to have their mind break, they should go read Unflattening, and then they'll understand how
yeah,
cartoons work.
sure. Well, great. Thanks for saying that. Yeah. So obviously, this is Jessica and I had a very similar trajectory in that way, in that we both came out of not really sort of planning to be cartoonists and kind of fell into it. And we both got obsessed with in our own little, trajectory of, meeting a cartoonist somewhere or meeting someone who knew a cartoonist, like, what do you know? What kind of paper do they use? And sort of very slowly figuring out these, and then finding things like the Cartoon Art Museum or a random Winsor McCay art exhibit and being able to like look up close. It's like, oh, I see what he's doing. It's much bigger than I
Right.
thought. That single
Right.
revelation when you're a young artist trying to make comics and you realize that most cartoonists actually work much larger and then shrink it
Oh
down,
yeah, no, a Peanuts page is
is mind
huge.
blowing.
Yeah, a Peanuts page
Yeah.
is huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So, I was, uh, and I also had a couple of art teachers in high school who really turned me off of drawing and didn't, I wasn't particularly, I can't say I was a particularly great student, but they were also not very good teachers and did not, only push me further away from wanting to draw in any kind of, or paint for that matter. And so it really wasn't until I was in Ann Arbor, where I got my undergrad, and I was studying comparative literature. I'd done linguistics for a while. Um, and that it's that whole swirl of like definitely studying comparative literature and some literary theory also got sort of opened my mind to thinking about form and how stories are
Right.
structured and how different media are similar and different, because I was studying film and literature and getting into comics on the side. So that was also a big influence. So all that swirl of different influences from different media starting to seep in, and all the music that I listened to as well. Uh, Around that time, I met a cartoonist named Terry Laban, who actually is in Philadelphia with me now, although he's way up north. I hardly ever see him, but we were both living in Ann Arbor at the time. He's about 10 years older than me, and he was doing political comics in the local paper, political cartoons. And I'd seen
Okay.
around town in some used bookstores like a mini comic that he'd done called Unsupervised Existence, which was later picked up by Fantagraphics later in the 90s. But I kind of cold called him because I was a DJ at the local station, WCBN, in Ann Arbor, which was the U of M freeform station. And I asked him if he would design a button for our fundraiser,
Okay.
which was great. And it was a good thing for the station, but it was also totally like a pretext to go to his studio and like see what a cartoonist actually looks like and does. And he was extremely generous with me and, showed me all of his stuff. So this is probably, again, 1988 or so, 89. And he's like, but you don't need to know any of this stuff really in comic. You just make comics and you share them with people by just photocopying. And he gave me a bunch of these mini comics, and he gave me even more crucially a thing called Fact Sheet 5, which was a kind of paper internet that used to be published every month throughout the 80s and into the 90s by a guy named Mike Gunderloy, an anarchist food co-op guy up in Albany, New York, who would just like people would send him mini comics, music zines, cassettes. Uh, he'd get subscriptions to like Wind Washers Union Weekly, Window Washers Union was like one of the magazines he had. And he would just like do these very small, kind of like Maximum Rock and Roll, if you follow like punk zines and stuff. It's like newsprint, really thick magazine size thing with like little short listings, more of a description than a review, how much it costs, what the address is, do they accept trades? And just like page after page. And you would just pour through this thing and you'd like make a little checklist and just send a few dollars off or a few stamps in return or trade stuff. And once I saw that and saw what Terry was doing, I was like, oh, I just start drawing comics and I go to Kinko's and make photocopies, and then I'm a cartoonist. And that's kind of how I got started. Still, even at that point, not thinking like, oh, I found my calling, but really enjoying it and starting to trade with people and get to know other cartoonists and get a few reviews in some zines and eventually in the Comics Journal. But really, honestly, about 10 years went by before I was like, oh, I guess I'm actually a cartoonist. This is like, there's no turning back now. This is like for real. But it wasn't like a kind of focused, goal at the beginning.
Okay. I
So
mean, go ahead, Mark.
when you started, were you immediately taken up with the whole idea that you work with the constraints of
Mhm.
storytelling? Was that something that when you started as a cartoonist, was that something that you immediately grasped, or was it something that evolved as you worked?
It's something, a bit of both, I would say. I mean, it really is something that evolved in terms of my awareness of it. It's something I
Hmm.
played around with from my earliest stuff, and I always liked stuff that was kind of pretty formally playful and challenging. Um, but when I first started making comics, I didn't have a particular story. I don't have a mouse I don't have like a big epic to tell. I
Right.
kind of want to talk a little bit about everything. I don't have a particular, type of story I wanted to do. I wasn't like a superhero guy, so that I wasn't, particularly into the genre stuff. So I was just trying out different stuff. So I did a little bit of autobio. I did some dream comics. I did some little, my very first comic was called Cause and Effect, and I just collected those kind of urban legend kind of thing, like step on a crack, break your mother's back, and
Right.
and tried to make them into comics, with mixed levels of success. But that was like my first thing of just like trying out an idea to see what I could learn as I through the process.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I was just interesting listening to you tell your story. When you were talking about something that didn't quite appeal to you and you came back to it and came back to it. It's funny because when we were doing Ex Libris, we were talking about it.
Hmm.
I'll be brutally honest, that was kind of my experience with it
Hmm.
because I was sort of like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah,
And then I kind of went back to it, and I really like once I puzzled out what you were doing, I really started to be compelled by it. And that I just find that so exciting. I mean, and actually reading through Six Treasures of Spiral, same thing. I love the fact that you do these small little pieces and that each one it's almost like uh it, because I love like word games and crossword puzzles and things like
sure.
that too. So it's funny as I was reading it and I got to the end with your end notes. When I got to the part where you started explaining how things worked, I was like, I don't want to even read this.
Hmm.
I was like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's for like the readers that want to know that. I
yeah,
definitely think there, if you're a reader who's like into word games and puzzles, like there's an aspect of like trying to figure out on your own how those stories work. And
yeah,
we're talking in total nonsense right now to people who haven't seen this book yet. But I think we'll
right.
get back to that in a minute. But in terms of my discovery of all that, yeah, like some of the early stuff I did where I felt like I was headed in an interesting direction was like I did a early mini one of my early mini comics had a story called Shop Zucchini, and it was 6 pages wordless, and it was just a close up of hands taking a zucchini and cleaning it and chopping it up and throwing it in a saute pan. And it was really fun to do. It was just a drawing, visual storytelling experiment. It was almost like a school, self-teaching, giving myself assignments, but when that mini comic came out, that particular story got called out by a lot of people. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Just like seeing someone chop up zucchini. And I was like, okay, so just like no character, no story, like really limiting myself to a very basic thing. I did another comic that I actually did not include in Six Treasures, although maybe I should have, called Real Time Comics, where
Okay.
I basically drew a panel. We're not doing a video thing, so I'm not going to bother to pull out. But basically, I drew a panel in
I mean,
pencil,
I'm always happy to see it, but you don't have
and
to.
then I scanned it, and or maybe I photocopied it because this is like the late '80s. But
Right.
um, and then I drew a little bit more, and I drew a little bit more. So like the comic is actually the story of the
Gotcha.
drawing coming, to completion from a
Okay.
sketch to a finished thing. And I
Right.
managed to get a little story in there. So that was another one where I was like, oh, this is really interesting, playing around with the materiality of the panel and the reading experience. And Mark, you were talking about like the experience of being sort of put off and then trying to like learn the codes. So it's in a similar in a way to getting into Jerry Moriarty's work, where like you look for intentionality, you look for like at first it's like this is confusing, but then you spend some time, and that can be really rewarding if the artist on the other end is also putting in the work to give you something to find out. Um,
Yeah, I mean, not to derail it, but it actually when I was reading, because I read your little essay at the end where
mhm.
you talked about the process, and it made me think about, as a playwright, oftentimes your first work will come from a lot of constraints. Like usually you're writing for like a 10-minute play festival where they
Right.
say everything has to be at this sort of theme or like I worked with a theater company where we were like it's a 10-minute play festival, but every play has to involve a brown couch
Sure. Yeah.
because we had this couch and it was like you can use it any way you want,
Yeah.
but and I began to be I like I this is what I find really fascinating about your stuff is like just like okay. And especially because you're self-imposing these things. I think that
Mm.
is so cool. And I not to make it about my work, but I mean like that's one of the things that I really connected to when I was reading that piece at the end. Obviously, all of the pieces in Six Treasures, I was finding interesting things, but when I got to the end, I was reading that and I was like, oh man, yeah, this is really interesting. So
Yeah. Thanks. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. So like my basic idea about constraints and the reason I use them so often and give myself constraints is that you already have constraints. When you're making art, you have a 10-minute deadline for a play, or you have the page format. You have a certain number of page. Even the fact that a comic, even a mini comic, is going to be a certain even number of folded pages. You have, you don't really want to do a 5-page mini comic, because you have to have either 4 or 8 pages, and then what are you going to do with that extra stuff? So there's always format stuff you need to think about. And the whole to get back to the black and white line thing, the reason it took me a while to realize that although I loved it aesthetically, it's also comes out of the technological constraints of the 20th century, where printing was better than it had been in the 19th century, but basically you had to draw really bold lines for it to reprint on a newspaper or in a cheap newsprint pulp magazine. So that's why, like, H.G. Peters' wonderful Wonder Woman drawings they look like woodcuts, because he was just like drawing for very simple flat colors. I've seen other Peters drawings where he actually had a very delicate, he was able to do very like cross hatching and very fine work. But when he do those comic book pages, because of the printing technology, he's like, all right, I'm going to just do bold lines. And I really think that that's how the sort of Silver Age and the classic superhero and for that matter, newspaper comic style, bold lines, not a lot of shading, flat colors, is more of a technological choice than an aesthetic choice. Now it's an aesthetic choice because now we can do anything. Like, the thing that's changed in my life as a cartoonist, when I started out, I was the same way. I was like, well, I'm not going to try using watercolor or drawing in pencil because it's just going to go to Kinko's and it's going to look like hell. And now there's so many, it's so much cheaper to do digital printing. And of course, online printing, you can do anything you want online, just posting stuff online, that younger artists, I find are they feel no, need to be shackled to India ink and a nib,
Right.
It's much more just like one choice among many, where it used to be like, that's really the only thing in town, unless you get a really fancy publisher who's gonna, do like a, like a European thing with the full color, watercolor effect, and then you need a team of people doing it for you and doing the separations and all that stuff. And now you can just do whatever you want, really.
One of the things I appreciate about the fact that you give yourself constraints is it's literally something I sometimes do as like a mental health sort out my emotions type thing. It's like, I've got too many thoughts running through my head, too many feelings. Let me try to condense them into a sonnet or a haiku or whatever, because then I will have to pick the right words. And by forcing myself to think about the form as much as what's going on, I'm able to distill my thoughts. So where I'm going with this is what generally comes first for you? The idea of the story that you want to tell, or do you challenge yourself with a constraint?
Almost always a constraint. So that's what I've learned over time, is that the work that I'm most excited about doing is when I get a notion, a friend tells me on something, or I see some other work of art, and I'm like, oh, that looks like an interesting form to do as a comic. How would that work? Or how would I do a comic that reads as a palindrome over multiple pages,
that
like
one
drawn
was,
onward.
I loved that.
So, and the reason to kind of weave this back into the I'm sorry to use that word now, it's been tainted, but to weave that back into my narrative of discovering constraints and becoming a cartoon, becoming the sort of full cartoonist that I feel like I am now, was discovering Raymond Queneau's book, Exercises in Style, in around early 92 or so. I graduated college in 1990, and I was in Ann Arbor, and I stayed there another 3 or 4 years working at Borders bookstore, another long gone bookstore chain.
Yeah.
In the original store,
I remember Borders.
Actually, the chain began in Ann Arbor, so I was working
in
store number 1. And it was
Store
actually a really
1.
great place to work.
I think I went there once. I feel like I went there once.
So they also, among other things, had a French language section, which was cool, especially at that time. You didn't really, it's hard to find and I read French. I'm pretty fluent French reader and speaker. So someone's like, oh, you should check out this book. I think you'd like it. And it's a little anecdote that this guy retells. He wrote it in 1947, and it takes place in Paris, and He just retells the story 99 times in all kinds of different ways, using different points of view, incorporating all the colors of the rainbow, telling the events backwards, telling it all as like grunts and pshaws, telling it as a blurb, doing it as a sonnet, doing it as a haiku, doing it in pidgin English, doing it in pig Latin, and it's very funny and very playful. And before I was even halfway through it, I was like, this is what I want to do, but in comics. This idea is so cool. And it really crystallized something that I've been playing around with, like the real-time comics, doing the zucchini thing. There was sort of something about, and using all these different styles and all the different stuff I was getting exposed to and wanting to play around with. I realized that I could take this idea of a simple story told through different styles and points of view and adapt that to comics. I could use a lot of those same things. And I do actually have a, Colors of the Rainbow version. I do have a version telling a story backwards like he does. But mostly I did all kinds of other stuff, because in comics you have the text and all the literary and kind of rhetorical approaches you can do in writing. But you also have that massive field of the drawing, which is not just drawing realistically or cartoony, but evoking different styles, different genres, different periods of comics or art history, and then finally the kind of glue that binds them together, which is the layout, page layout, and design, and panel shape and size and quantity per page, that are also really fun to play with. So that. Working on that project, I read that book in 1992, and I waited like 5 years before starting because I didn't feel like I was ready. I was still doing my first mini comics. Another crucial comic from that period, which is in Six Treasures of the Spiral, is called House Music, and that's a one-page comic. It was the first comic I got paid money for.
I mean, that's always a good thing. I am very in favor of cartoonists being paid money.
Yeah.
That means that they make
at that
more
time,
comics.
and again, this is sort of mid-90s when Tower Records was still a going concern. Wow, we're talking about a lot of dead retail out.
Welcome to.
So I guess that's the way it goes.
Welcome to the machine.
Right.
I'm only 3 years younger than you, so I mean, like it.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Go ahead and make these references.
So Tower Records, you might remember, had actually 2 free in-house magazines, Pulse Magazine and Pulse Classical. And Mark Wiedenbaum, who was the editor of both of them really for a long time and was a big comics fan, still is, he really like nurtured a lot of, he would read mini comics and he would just like reach out to people. Adrian Tomina got his start there before he was doing Optic Nerve for Drawn and Quarterly. He was doing a mini comic and he was doing a monthly strip in Pulse Magazine. And then when he stopped that because he was going to do a series for Drawn and Quarterly, Mark started getting even more people and he called me up. And I didn't end up doing a regular gig, but I did this page House Music, which I was really happy with. And it really, again, was like, oh, there's something about limiting myself to, in that case, there's no people in it. There's sort of a narration, but there's no story to it. It's just sort of like views of a room. It's like an ambient, I called it House Music, ironically thinking about the genre, which is very much not, more about the music of a house, more like John Cage. 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the idea of like the ambient noises making up the meat of the comic. And Mark really loved it too. He paid me to, this kind of set me on the wrong path actually, because it made me think I was going to be much more successable financially than I've ended up making comics. But he paid me to do the comic, and he paid well because this is like before the first dot-com boom. Like mid-90s was a very unrealistic time to be an illustrator or cartoonist, and because there was so much money, you're like, $500 to do a little comic strip, that's awesome, this is great, my life's going to be so awesome. And then in 1997 that just like disappeared overnight. But he commissioned the comic, and then he actually bought the original from me, wrote a very nice essay about it called Home Decoration in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, which I think you can still find on his website, disquiet.com. I should have asked him to reprint it in his collection. That would have been cool. Maybe I can put it on my Substack. I'll have to ask him if I can do that. Anyway, that was also something that really felt like, okay, this really works for me to like really start from the idea of what's the concept, and then see what kind of story or just like narrative or visual content comes out of it. So by the time I finished drawing the 99 Ways to Tell a Story collection, which is the name of the book collection, it was published in 2005 by Penguin. It's actually still in print. It's on its 22nd printing now, and it's
Nice.
I've edition about 8 or 9 international editions, at least 5 or 6 that are in print. France and Spain have a mainland China simplified Chinese edition and a Taiwan what's it called? Complex Mandarin edition that's actually coming out this month in Taiwan. So if you're listening from Taipei, go to your bookstore.
I don't know if we've had any. I every once in a while look at the map to see where we have listeners, and we've hit every continent except Antarctica now. But
Oh, nice.
I don't know if I've seen any in the
At
Japan.
SPX, a couple of young Chinese MFA students from MICA came by and they were giggling at my table, and I was like, "Hey, you guys know my work?" And she's like, "Yeah, I have the Chinese edition of your book." So that was cool. It's the first time I've met a Chinese reader, so that was cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, and meanwhile, as I'm working on that book, I'm reading about Raymond Queneau and learning about him, the author, and he was a super fascinating guy, and he wrote wonderful novels that are very funny. His best-known work is actually Zazie and the Metro, which Louis Malle made into a movie in the 60s. It's a very funny kind of farcical romp through Paris in the 60s with a young girl, left to her own devices for the day. But it turned out he also had started this group called Oulipo, the Workshop for Potential Comics. Oulipo is Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, to do the full French name. And so I lay all this out, if your listeners, if your head's starting to spin, in an essay in the back of my new book, in Six Treasures of the Spiral, where I walk through this whole kind of narrative of how I learned about this stuff. So at that point, I became even more fascinated in like, oh, these guys would meet, and some women would meet and continue to meet once a month in Paris to talk about ideas for rules you could give yourself to create more interesting writing and poetry. And a very famous example is a book in English. It was called Avoid. In French, it's called La Disparition, by a writer named Georges Perec, and it's like a 300-page novel written without the letter E. And that sounds impossible. And again, it's one of those things where you read the first page, and you're like, oh, this is
I've read it. It's possible.
But yeah,
I don't know if it's good, but it's
and the English edition is somewhat controversial because it's not really a translation; it's more of like an adaptation of the idea.
Right.
But I've read it in French, and I've read a bit of the
Is it better in French
version? And what's amazing is that about 10 pages in, you get used to these weird forms, because like every single everyday expression that has an E in it, it's hard enough in English, but in French, of course, it's like used for feminine endings and for most of the main articles, So you really have to find weird ways to express yourself. But he does these ingenious, workarounds that become natural after a little while, to the point where famously one book review, when it came out in 1969, reviewed the book and didn't realize that there was no E's in there. It was like, oh, George Pracht has a new novel out. It's sort of a murder mystery, and it's pretty good, very different from his other stuff, So there is a kind of like, you can get used to even the most bizarre, formal interventions on writing. So
this is a good and a bad thing.
What was the English title again?
Avoid, which is very clever. Okay. So like La Disparition, the disappearance, avoid, void, but it also means avoid because you're avoiding the letter E. And there's also avoid in the work.
So I
sort of done. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just saying that the idea of that boggles me. That's
right. And what's crazy is that Georges Perec did not invent this form. It's called a lipogram, and it's existed since ancient Greece. There are ancient Greek texts written without one or another letter. There's some Spanish medieval texts that were written without using one letter or another. Yeah. And even in the early 20th century, an American writer wrote a kind of riff on The Great Gatsby called Gadsby with a D. Apparently, I've never read it. Apparently, it's not actually all that good, but it was written without the letter E in English. So it's like a weird, that's one of the many things I like about this group, Oulipo, is that they're very kind of, at first glance, it seems very avant-garde and forward-looking, but they're also real traditionalists, and they look through the whole history of literature to find these kind of seams of experimentation and playfulness that you find,
Mhm.
going back across cultures and across genres and eras of art.
Yeah, this actually because I was trying to think when you were talking about this, I was like, wow, I don't know that I could do that. I mean,
You
I
definitely
always
could. I'll give you an assignment. Yeah, just pick a letter. If you don't want to do the E, try like an A. I started
uh-huh.
working on a little autobiographical sketch without using the letter M, which I should really get back to and finish up. And I was like, that sounds really dumb. It's not going to work. But I got 2 pages into it and I was like, I'm kind of enjoying this. I have to, it renews your writing as part of the
So,
goal. So I think you should try it.
but but do you oh, sorry, now I'm super fascinated by this. So do you like not use words with M, or do you replace the M in some way? I don't
Ideally, you do not use you
would
find a different way to say something. I would say
right,
that's kind of a light LITE sort of cheaty way to do it is like to do,
right,
not put an E in there, but use like like a copyright symbol or something like that. You could
right.
do that, but everyone's going to be like, okay, I get that. So like
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me to write about myself, Matt Madden, I have two M's and not use mem, but also means I can't say mom or mother, so I can't talk
Right,
about talking about my mom, who's very important,
right.
obviously in my life.
Wow.
I had to find ways to talk around that kind of stuff.
The
So,
one who
Um,
birthed
me,
me.
I am,
but
there's
it
so
you
many, so many things that are especially subjectively directed that have an M in there,
right.
that I found it really interesting as an exercise.
Yeah, because like what Tad just said, you couldn't say the one who birthed me because that's got an M in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, the
Right.
one who
Um,
birthed
yeah, that's
I.
The one
fascinating.
who I came from. No, you can't say that
Yeah.
either.
Because like you know,
The
because I
one
like I tend to
from hence
work.
I.
I tend to
Yeah,
try to
getting
put
better.
like
Yeah.
sort of like especially after I just finished this huge project that was like plays that covered decades. So like and as I've told Tad many times, it's like I had to write something else that wasn't about comic books and that wasn't
Mm,
so sweeping. So I mean, like I what I'm working on right now is like it's two people in one room, and I'm like
mm.
that's what I'm doing, and like that I fathom. But I mean, like and this is what's awesome about talking with you is like the idea of messing, not even messing isn't the right word, but limiting yourself with
Yeah.
actual language is fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think
Mm,
there's a lot of that in theater too, and that
right.
reminds me that for me another strong through line creatively in my life, which I feel like is like parallel almost, is Samuel Beckett's work, and
Right.
he's someone who really and constrained in the same sense of that limitation of just like it's just one woman in a mound of sand on the stage.
Right.
She can't
Yeah.
move.
Yeah.
What's she going to do for 20 minutes?
Hmm.
Uh,
Well,
and
yeah. I also am an actor. I did a production of Prometheus Bound where after like the first 2 minutes of the show, I was pinned to a rock by a
yeah,
giant thing for an hour and a half. And
right.
it was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure.
um it yeah, it's God, it's fascinating. But I mean, like this actually how for yourself, when
Yeah.
you put a constraint like that on yourself, like how often what's your percentage as far as stuff that actually works and
Mm.
something that ends up as a disaster? Or maybe you don't think it ever is a disaster, but or it just fails. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
I don't think anything's been a disaster. Definitely things have failed in the sense that I reached a certain point, and I'm like, I don't see a way forward on this. This is getting really, too convoluted, or I can't make this move to the next level. And I have quite a few projects that I've, set aside at that point. But
Hmm.
even those, I think like it's not that I think they can't be done. It's just like I reached a point where I'm like, all right, I gave it a few whacks. I definitely have a folder full of ideas that I've worked at various levels on and have just gotten frustrated and given up on temporarily. Like
Hmm.
almost any of those, I don't think there's any of those I think would never be done. There's things that I've worked on, and sometimes even published bits of in like mini comics or on my Instagram, or but when I used to have a Tumblr,
Hmm.
And then like was like, no, it's not really working out. Or I'll show it to someone like, I just don't see where this is going. And I'm like, oh, I guess
Right.
you're right. Yeah.
I mean,
But I
the
do
operative,
think I think that's part of the general,
yeah,
the way creativity works is that I don't believe in um, like final failure. I also don't believe a work is ever truly finished. Everything's always
right.
going in kind of a cycle of you building something up and then you overdo it and it starts to like lose coherence and you're like, oh shit, I ruined it. You take some stuff away, you add some new stuff, and you, oh wait, this is starting to work again. There's always that wave form
Yeah, because
moving through the
I
work.
think the operative word in your was temporarily. Because do you go back to that file occasionally and suddenly find a way to finish stuff?
Well, I go back to that folder. I'm trying to think if there's an example where I've gone back to that and be like, I got it, and then
Yeah,
finished it. I do. There are a few things that I have gone back to in recent years and been like, I had not, maybe this will work, and then play around a bit, and like, oh no, that's not gonna work either.
yeah.
So
Or even just taking the idea and said, let's start from scratch, and then I don't know. I don't.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the process of that. So I have two new possible book projects that I'm working on that are in sort of like both in early stage of development. And one of them is a very constrained kind of additive and subtractive thing where I'm making myself add a new every new page adds new panels in between the previous page's panels. So it's kind of like an
uh,
expanding kind of thing. And I honestly, and I actually, when I described, when I was teaching at School of Visual Arts, towards the end of my time there, probably 2010 or 11. And I first came up with the scheme and I made a little diagram of how it would work. It'll be like a 45-page book, like which is great because that's like the French album length. Um, and I showed it to my students. I was very excited about the concept. And one of my students, I remember, they looked at it, my diagram, and were like, "It just doesn't seem like it would work." And like that was like for me in that case that was very motivating. I was like, all right, I'm going to show
right.
you. I'm going to do this, you know.
Yeah,
And I've gotten a few iterations into it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I can pull this off, but I like where this is so far where it's going. And the concept is flexible enough that one option to get back to what you're saying is like I could just like jettison this current version I'm doing and start a whole new one. I've thought about even starting a couple in tandem and just seeing which one gets further along. So
yeah. Actually, that suggests another question, if I may.
yeah.
Like you said, you have a diagram.
Hmm.
How often do you start with a diagram? I mean, I was like I said, I didn't read the explanation portion
Yeah.
of the, but I did see that there were some like diagrams there, and I was wondering like how often do you go to that point? And I have a follow
Um,
up after this.
yeah, pretty often. I mean, it depends on how kind of you know, uh how I guess geometric the constraint is
Mhm.
that it needs some kind of visualization to do. Definitely where I'm talking about starting with a 9 panel page and then making 2 pages where there's new panels inside in
Right.
between each of those panels and expanding that and then
Yeah.
shrinking back down. I really needed to get some graph paper and sort of map it all. It's like, how would this work? Here's, the A page one or A panels, the second section or B panels, and so on. I really needed that. Otherwise, I can't. I have no path to go through. Something like the Drawn Onward, which is I called it a palindrome, but it's really more
Hmm.
precisely a crab cannon or a cankerzan, which is actually a
Right. Right.
musical form, and which various people have played around with, like Douglas Hofstadter, who did Gödel, Escher, Bach, did a text version of that in that
Right.
book, which I wasn't aware of because I tried to read that book and I found it towed down, so I couldn't get through it. So I'm a slow reader. I'll read it someday, but uh, reading failures are like creative failures to me. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
give up on a book. I just set it
Right.
aside for 10 years.
I understand that one.
Yeah, so the concept is that it's not a strict palindrome like the story begins and then into the middle and then it goes backwards to the end, which is like the more race car or a man, a plan, a canal, Panama type of thing. It's more
Right.
like you have two full expression, two or like two
Yeah.
palindromes that are like flipped on top of each other. So it's like you have two
Hmm.
storylines going in opposite directions. And so in that case, the concept is like once you kind of figure it out in your brain, I didn't really need to have like a diagram of that. I just needed to start
Right.
working on it in that case, it was just visualizing it on the wall and just like making sketches like thumbnails and putting them on the wall and trying to make sure that I could read in multiple directions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I would assume that if you're talking about like a visual constraint is probably different than say a straight narrative constraint, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Although, yeah, go ahead.
Although I mean, it's sort of the same thing. I mean, like we're talking about comics, so
Yeah.
visual. Yeah. If you understand what I'm asking,
yeah, I mean, well, thing is, I mean, I love diagrams just for the sake of diagrams too. And
well,
part
yeah,
of that,
me
the
too.
back, so in the back of my new book, Six Treasures of the Spiral, Comics Formed Under Pressure, it's a short story collection, and you are not required to look in the back. But I did include a section in the back because I think a lot of people do like the sort of director's commentary angle. And if you've never encountered this kind of constraints before, I think a lot of readers will be like, what the hell is going on here? And you can look in the back. And I will say, like, probably half the stories, if you read it closely, you can figure out what the constraint is. You can, oh, the drawn onward, you read it a few times, you can really pretty much figure out that it's this sort of symmetrical kind of structure. But there are a few ones that are pretty hard to figure out what the constraint is without looking at my diagram in the back. So, but for example, in the case of a form that I've used several times is a sestina, which is actually a poetry form, which I was attracted to because instead of using rhyme, it uses 6 repeating N words that are shifted around in a different order each time. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of permutation, taking an idea and just viewing it from different angles. And in that case, having the diagram, which is like looking at in your typical like poetry handbook that shows you like XXXA, XXXB, sort of like what the structure is. I'm like, that's cool. But then in the case of the sestina, one of the ways that people visualize, and this is in the back of my book if you want to look, is the 6 words follow a very particular like algorithm, a different order that they have to appear in each time. And this is not a modernist thing, by the way. This is a form invented by French troubadours in the Middle Ages. It's like an old form, like a song form. And one of the ways you can visualize that new order is you take 1, 2, 6 in a vertical row, and you draw a spiral starting from the 6 up to the 1, then back down to the 5, then up to the 2, and so on. And once I saw that spiral, I was like, oh, that's really cool. And hence, I mean, it's right in the title of the book, Six Treasures of the Spiral. You've got a number, you've got a spiral. That already I had so many ideas or so many potential directions for storytelling. Okay, 6 characters, obviously, 6 main characters. The spiral is going to give me some kind of visually could mean, people are going crazy or like, sort of cartoon spirals. And then my original idea was to do an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's Descent into the Maelstrom, which is about a boat going to a giant, spiral, whirlpool. And I did, which I wasn't really workable, but I did keep that idea of the Maelstrom, and I renamed it the Weirdstrom, which I'm pretty proud of, actually. I like that.
Yeah.
And weird with WIRD, old Englishy sounding. And so that in that case, the diagram, that image of the spiral, the fact that I had the number 6 as a kind of operating principle was where the whole story came out of. That's where I got the whirlpool. That's where I got the names of all the characters. There's 6 characters, and they're named Einiger, Twopenny, Teresa, Forsyth, the sailor. The captain is named Captain Sank, which is obviously in French it's number 5, but obviously in English it has a much worse connotation if you're a ship captain. and Sixto, the cabin boy.
Yeah.
So it all came out of that, just playing with that, and pretty soon it starts to coalesce into a story. And at a certain point, then like the more kind of traditional classic narrative interest starts to come in, like, oh, all right, so how do these characters interact? What is their journey together? What are they learning? And that kind of more traditional storytelling stuff. So there's a bit of a back and forth there, because we're talking about very like postmodern kind of ideas about formalism and experimentalism, but I love that stuff, and everything I do is kind of filtered through it. But I love classic storytelling. Like I'm not trying to do necessarily outre like non-narrative work. I would like to
Well,
do
I mean,
that. Some of my stuff is, and I definitely, part of me wants to like push more in that direction at some point. But I basically love a good yarn, and I think a lot of my stuff, like I said earlier, I don't do genre in the sense that I don't do superhero stuff in particular, but like these are mostly genre stories. Actually, there's a bunch of kind
right.
of fantasy, and especially in that mode of like Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne, that early American short story kind of thing that I like a lot.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's very clear. I mean, like one of the things that I love about your stuff is that it is so interesting in structure and style, but that the idea of telling a good story never gets lost. Like even if it's just like, and it may be my lack of uh I may be a dunderhead, but I mean, even uh oh God, what was it? War God, the title escapes me. Uh
War During
Life in
Lifetime.
Wartime. Yeah, like
War
War
During
in
Lifetime.
Lifetime. I laughed out loud
Oh, that's dark.
when I finished that. I mean, it's dark, but
Yeah.
just the wordplay of it and
Hmm.
this
Oh yeah.
I and that even as just a one-page joke, I love that. And also the series with the Walking Man all just really tickled me. Uh, but this was another
Yeah,
question I
I
had.
was because you brought up the Sistina. I got
Yeah.
to cut in really
Yeah,
quick because I picked up Walker as a digital comic
Oh,
two or
right. You
three
had mentioned
years
that. Yeah.
ago. As
Hmm.
soon as when I learned that it existed and when somebody worked on using a poetical form in comics, I have to look at this, and it's been one of my favorites ever since. I love
hmm,
that you essentially took one character position as
yeah,
Hmm.
your Sistina thing and then just rearranged the clothing, the background, whatever. But the character itself is the same position the way you managed to tell, the six different stories using the one, just I
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Shout
yeah,
out
yeah,
to Alexander Rothman and Paul K. Tunis of Inkbrick Comics. They did that mini comic edition
right,
5 or 6
yeah.
years
right.
ago. And yeah, so that
Well,
is
yeah,
also Sistina. So there in this book, there are two different, extremely different comics using that Sistina structure in very different ways. And that's one of the cool things of like these sort of diagrams and structures that you can go back into them. I would love to do a book length Sistina and figure out how would you do like a graphic novel where there's that repetition of these six elements kind of spiraling through different
hmm,
permutations and maybe in a more subtle way where it's like not obvious.
yeah.
I actually bought,
The-
I have not read it yet, but I bought a short story collection by Alice Madison is her name. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's apparently they're interconnected short stories using the Sistina structure as a kind of looping system throughout the
Oh,
stories.
that's
So
great.
it has been tried in fiction before.
The other question I had, it kind of goes back to the structural thing, the tic-tac-toe comics.
Mm.
Um, I really love them, but it did prompt the thought: was this actually a tic-tac-toe game that you and Tom Hart played and then set up the?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes, that was I mean,
Yeah,
it's comics as a game. We have a long tradition in comics of doing jam comics, like hanging out at a
sure, of
bar with
course, yeah,
friends and stuff and handing around the panels. And I've always liked the idea, but find the results kind of like not always that compelling. And so
right.
I'm trying to think of like a fun way to do a different way of like a kind of collaborative comic. And at the time, Tom and I were still both teaching in New York at the School of Visual Arts. And we would go out for coffee sometimes. And I was like, hey, I have an idea and I explained him the idea, which is we would just lay out a 9 panel grid and we would play tic-tac-toe, but with with drawings. But like if I'm X, I have to really incorporate as many X's into my drawing as possible, and he's O's. And so we drew it as a tic-tac-toe game. So the top right panel, would be like an O thing. And then I would be like, all right, well, I'm going to take the middle and make an X panel of some sort. Um, And then when we came to one of them, we came to a draw. One of them, Tom got so absorbed with the comics that he actually left himself open, and I beat him, which is pretty rare for it to happen in tic-tac-toe. But but inevitably we were left with 2 or 3 panels that were blank, and then we would just then we would switch to a more traditional back and forth, just finish it off. And this was like in pencil, I think, and then we each took 1 page home and inked it and sort of cleaned it up a little.
Yeah, I guess my actual like that's so you guys were actually doing the full drawings.
We were doing the full drawing in kind of thumbnail form, but
right.
pretty tight pencils, because like if you look at the end, you can sort of see which ones are me and which are Tom. But we were kind of like both kind of like trying to correlate our styles a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, in the back of the book, I have the diagram of how it was actually played and sort of chess rules style or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I should have read that stuff. But I mean, it's like I kind of I was just curious as to whether you guys sat down and said, let's play tic-tac-toe, and then we know what our layout is, and you'll draw these.
No, it was actually drawing the panels.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that. That was the goal. Yeah.
That's amazing. Anyway.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed those two that are in the book. The other one, if I may, like the other,
please.
Sorry, I have all sorts of questions.
This is why you're here, Mark.
What I'm here for.
The haikus, which I thought were beautiful, and I love, we were talking about how, just the black and white pen and ink, how striking that is, but then it actually makes it really pop when you use color. And I was actually curious about these haikus, whether you did these actually sitting in these environments, like the one where while I was drawing, wind blew away my ink cap, found it in the grass, whether that was actually happening while you were were you working on this in the open air and that happened? Or did you just
I kind of cheated in the sense there I did an initial version just with like a pen and ink on a sheet of paper or in a sketchbook. So there is an original version of these that are just very quick pen drawings. And they're okay, but then when I came to collecting them, I was like, it would be worth the sort of like cheat to like go back in. I mean, the whole point of haiku, one of my favorite things that I read and sort of researching, and we all know the sort of syllable count thing, and then it's about themes of nature and stuff. But one of the coolest, one kind of quality of the haiku that I really liked, and I'm thinking about how that would work in comics, is a haiku is meant to be read in one breath.
Right.
And so I was trying to be mindful of, and in that sense, it would have been just having that original pen sketch would be like even more sort of pure expression of that idea. But as you can see, I tweak it because I'm also, you're not supposed to talk about like pop culture, and I've got cultural motifs in my, in some of them. So I'm talking about myself, and you're not supposed to do like subjective stuff. So I was like playing with the rules, doing a kind of push and pull, which I think is also a fun
when
thing
I
to
write haiku, I only pay attention to the syllable rules.
But like when I read that specific one with the ink cap, I was like, oh, were you sitting on a hillside somewhere sketching and writing?
Yeah.
Or
it could certainly be done, but I'm a very plodding artist. So like, I'm self-taught, and everything I've done has been like really, working just like bit by bit to learn basic skills and stuff, and learning tricks to make my stuff look more polished and fluid than it is. And because there are cartoonists like Robert Crumb famously who can just like sit down at the top of a page and start drawing a perfect drawing and write the story as he goes down the page. Most of us are not like that. I don't think I'm not sort of like belittling myself by saying I'm a plodding artist. I think most, especially American artists, we don't have that same training. Like the average French cartoonist, because I've lived in France for 4 years, and that's actually, these haiku comics were drawn while I was doing a workshop at an art school there. And I just find that the average French artists, they have better public schools, probably. They just get better training as kids. But there's like a much more of a tradition of drawing skills taught. Like there are a lot of kids who go to like Les Gobelins, which is the big animation school in France, in Paris, and in Angoulême, where I was living. There's a lot of animation activity. So there's a lot more kind of like virtuosity, which is based, even if it's a simple cartoony drawing style, they're just able to like crank it out really quickly, more than the average American cartoonist, I found.
Right.
So for me to do, I do think there are plenty of artists who could get out there with a sheet of paper and some watercolors and generate, a haiku like the one I did there live. But for me, it was like, maybe I'll try that sometime. But it was more an acceptable way to just like, all right, we can agree that, it's also like there's a mixture of watercolor. And it's actually, and even then, it's actually ink wash, which I then tinted in Photoshop, and then I added a bit of digital stuff too. So it's very, it's a little bit overworked, but I hope there's a final effect. Well, the fact that you're saying you're wondering if I drew it on site suggests that like I pulled it off to the extent that it looks.
Yeah, if you had told me that that was something you just generated on a sketchboard, while you were sitting on a hillside and actually
All right,
did
well, let's cut the tape back here and go back, and I'm going to say yes, I drew that directly in watercolor, sitting by the banks of the Charente River in France.
So, totally.
I will.
Speaking of which,
you forgot until Mark reminded you.
Oh yeah, no, I did draw that directly. There wasn't pencils or anything. I just went straight into the watercolor there.
All of my friends.
I should say though, before we move on from the haiku, and I don't know how soon this is going to air, but so the book is now the official launch
as early
is
as
November
tomorrow.
19th, which is coming up. Okay, great. November 19th is the official drop date. I'm actually doing, if anyone's in the Philadelphia area, I'm doing a reading and launch party with Sally Madden from the Thick Lines podcast at Partners in Sun here in Philadelphia. That's November 16th.
Thick Lines podcast is amazing.
It's great. Yeah.
It's probably the only comics podcast that I still listen to regularly, just because I'm so used to, I want to talk, or I want to hear what this person has to say about something, and now I like email them rather than looking for the podcast.
Yeah.
So
Tom,
Sally and Katie do great work.
Yeah, Sally and Katie are great. And so we're going to do a chat, and hopefully it'll turn out well enough to end up on the main feed of the podcast. The haiku, though, so we're doing pre-orders right now at the Uncivilized site, and you guys can share the link on your site later or something. But from now until November 19th, we're doing pre-orders, and every pre-order it's a discount, and it will come with a free signed print of one of the haiku comics. And I will have that.
See, I was
if you don't get on it now and you want into that later, that is something that will be available. It shows later. Go ahead.
I said I was dumb and bought my copy at CXC, so I don't get the
awesome. Well, I'll make sure that Tom send you guys some extra art prints. What we're doing is we're making prints of all of the haiku, but then each book is going to have a random one stuck in there. So there's going to be like a collect them all kind of aspect. So I think we'll be having them in shows for the coming year or so. So there'll be a chance to get one or get them all or whatever.
And he seems to be at a lot of shows that I go to. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And one of these days I'll get him on the show. We've been talking about it forever.
Sure.
He's a cool guy. How'd you hook up with Uncivilized?
My second book with them. It's been great.
What was the first with them?
Ex Libris is with Uncivilized.
Oh, it was with them.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it managed to come out before Uncivilized was on my radar. So I just thought of it as a Matt Madden book rather than an Uncivilized book.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll definitely link to the Uncivilized.
You're a brand now, as far as we're concerned.
Yes. Well, you are. I wanted to ask, because when you were giving like what got you into cartooning and whatnot, you were giving mostly American underground and whatnot, but I know that you've been very influenced by foreign and particularly European comics. So talk to me about when you discovered and when you started getting into comics outside of North America.
Yeah.
And like what struck you?
Well, first and foremost is Hergé and the Tintin comics. My part of my autobiography is that in 1971, when I was 3 years old, my family moved to Paris and lived there for 5 years. My dad was a lawyer and he worked in an office there. And so I was exposed to a lot of stuff then. That was actually my main superhero reading era. I would read a weekly newsprint title. It was like a perfect bound comic book called Strange. That's strange pronounced with a French accent. And it was
Right.
like Daredevil and Marvel reprints from the early 70s.
Right.
Um, and I was really into that stuff. And I'm not sure actually why, when we moved back to the States in 1976, why I didn't immediately go out and start buying Marvel comics. But for whatever reason, I was like, on to the next thing, I guess. Um, but I did read a lot of the Tintin and Asterix books then. And the Tintin in particular, more than I really understood until really when I drew the Six Treasures of the Spiral comic, and I could see how much but when I was trying to do like uh
That,
some
oh
style
God.
that was like pleasing to
Yeah.
me, that was like felt like it was my own style. I was like, yeah, but this is some heavy Hergé
Yeah.
influence in the
I
clean
I
line. And in terms of
I
the hatching, I was trying to do like a Roy, like more really like a bit of Roy Crane, a bit of like Alex Foster, the sort of Flash Gordon type of swoopy lines, which I
right.
don't have
Mhm.
that level of, again, that virtuosity to do it with that elegantly, but that was the influence there. But when it was done, I was
That
like, oh
that
wow,
that
this
was
is
one of my
really,
forehead slap moments because the the Six Treasures of the Spiral felt so familiar to me, and
mm,
I hadn't pinpointed the Tintin in my head until you said it, and before you even said Six Treasures of the Spiral, I'm like, oh wait,
yeah, yeah.
ah,
Yeah, that it was
hey,
well, it was a palm, because like I was thinking about like, oh yeah, sort of old newspaper comics and a bit of Roy Crane, and then I finished
Mhm.
it, and I think even someone pointed out to me, I was like, oh, you're really showing your Hergé influence, and I was like, oh my God, I am. So, and what was cool was that when I lived in France while I was a kid, and then I mentioned I was in Angoulême for 4 years doing a residency alongside Jessica at the Jessica Abel, who's my wife, also a cartoonist at the Maison des Auteurs, which is
and a
this
fantastic one.
amazing.
We'll plug her while you're mentioning her.
Sure, yeah.
One of these
Uh,
days, I'll reach out to her.
we did it ended up, this is a residency in a little town where the Angoulême Comics Festival happens every year. And people usually go for 6 months, a year. But we took our kids, they were 2 and 4 years old, and we just plopped them in the local school. And we're like, we're going to stay here until they kick us out, basically. Which ended up being 4 years, was like the maximum they were willing to let us stay doing the
Wow,
residency there. But so my kids were going to French school, and by the time they've lost a lot of it now, of course, but they were pretty fluent in French. My
nice.
daughter in particular was speaking better than her grammar is better than mine is because she went to third grade in like French school.
Right.
So in that period, though, I read the entire Tintin series to my children as like bedtime reading. We would read a few
Okay.
pages a night, and it was to dive into it again after all these years. Because there's stuff like you read when you're younger, and it's very formative, but you don't actually know if it would hold up if you read it now.
Right.
And Tintin's hard to like. It's very dense, obviously, very word heavy, and in
Right.
a bit of a problematic way. But when you actually sit down and read those things and just like get into the rhythm of it, and I recommend reading like 3 or 4 pages at a time and then doing it the next day. It's so rewarding. It's such amazing storytelling. The drawing is so clear and simple yet evocative. The humor is spot on. The tension of the page, how the stories are laid out for like the page maximum dramatic effect of things like the page turn, just incredible.
Yeah.
Um, so meanwhile, in sort of like the 90s, I started to become aware through the indie comic scene of like stuff happening in France. I already knew from Raw, I'd learned about Jacques Tardy and Jacques Lustal, who are artists I like a lot, stuff that was in Raw and in heavy metal. In 1994, 95, I went to Paris where my brother was doing like a school year abroad. And I went to some bookstores and discovered this publisher, L'Association, which is kind of like the French, it's like a combination of Fantagraphics and Drawn Quarterly, but really revolutionized the scene in France in a big way. They were, a little bit of Image Comics too, because it's actually a creator-owned company. Uh,
Mhm.
Jean-Christophe Menu, Louis Trondheim, who's pretty well known in the States at this point, Kielofer, David Bay, who did the epileptic books for Pantheon, um, and a few others, established this as a sort of independent publisher, mostly black and white, with a cool, very like graphic color, like house style of cover design. And so I started reading those guys' work and Edmond Baudouin, who's an amazing older artist who's sort of from the 80s generation, I think he just turned 86 last year, and he's putting out like 2 books a year. Guys, just like an amazing. It's an inspiration for me as like I said, I'm 56 now. My kids are, I've have no problem with my output so far. I've put up books over time, but like I have a lot more stuff I want to do. And to meet someone like Edmond, who's a friend of mine now, who's 86 years old and like is that productive, is like really fills me with lots of energy and optimism for the future of being able to keep making comics. And So yeah, Baudouin is a big influence, and I translated a book of his called Pierrot for New York Review Comics that came out a few years ago, and we're very slowly trying to do more of his stuff in English because he's not really well known. Blutch was another guy who is like blew everyone's mind. Craig Thompson would not be the artist he is today from like Blankets on. You can really from between like Goodbye Chunky Rice, which was Craig Thompson's first book, and Blankets, you can almost see the Blutch influence inserting into his like that brushy, more elaborate brushing style. And Baudouin is also a big influence on Craig, and they're also friends from going to European. It's comics is so cool because as a culture, because it's not that big a scene. So once you're
Right.
traveling and you've had a few books published, you get invited to like the Helsinki Comics Festival or something, and you find yourself having dinner with Jose Munoz or like some famous artist who's just like staggering, icon to you, and you're drinking wine together and like, talking about whatever, talking about food usually.
Right.
So it's great. So yeah,
If
so
you're
the
me,
span of like,
baseball.
sorry,
I said, if you're me, baseball. I'm blown away with the number of like my comics icons that I've just
I do
casually
baseball.
talked baseball with.
Cool. That's not a conversation you and I are going to have, though, I'm afraid.
That's okay. I didn't imagine because you immediately went to the food and wine.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So I mean, I can talk food with you, not wine.
Okay. Oh, I remember Reggie bars. That's bringing them together.
They actually brought back Reggie bars recently.
Reggie bars.
My comic shop.
I haven't thought of that for years.
The comic owner is enough of a nut for that sort of thing that like one day, and it was ironically the day after I'd seen an article saying that they were bringing back Reggie bars for a limited time.
Why would
I
you
came
do
in
that?
and he's like, "You got to see this." He had managed to acquire an unopened original box of Reggie bars.
Amazing.
And I'm like, well, you could order some that you'd actually want to open and eat now. And so he had to order those too.
These were based, for those who don't know what this is, these were basically Baby Ruth bars, which were named after Babe Ruth for you
They were not.
Even were they not? Is it the other way around?
Not.
I always assume that was the case.
They were named after Teddy Roosevelt's daughter Ruth.
Oh my God. Well, see, now you got us talking about baseball.
Yeah.
And so the Reggie bars.
I think it was Teddy Roosevelt.
Was my one summer of baseball enthusiasm was 1977, 78 when the Yankees were
that's a good year to if you're a Yankee guy. I hate the Yankees, so But yeah, Reggie Bar. History 1920, Curtis Candy Company refashioned the candy cake into the Baby Ruth.
Candy Cake, that was the original name.
Yeah, with K's.
Candy Cake. Wow.
So there were even three of them if you go all the way across, because Kandy Kake. So yes, Baby Ruth is way, way better. But named after Grover Cleveland's daughter, Ruth Cleveland.
Ruth Cleveland. All right.
Yeah. I mean, ironically located on the same street as Wrigley
I bet
Field.
you didn't think you were going to be talking about candy bars this morning.
This is how my podcast goes. We go all over the place.
Yeah.
I'll let Mark ask another question since I went off on one of my epic tangents.
I feel like I picked your brain a lot, Matt. I would say, I had not read your new book, the Spiral. I'm sorry, my brain is
Six Treasures of the Spiral. Yeah,
Six Treasures of the Spiral. I had not read this until Tad sent me the PDF of it.
Well, it hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, it's not up for
Yeah.
another 3 weeks, so
Yeah,
don't worry
yeah.
about it. You're way ahead of the curve on this one.
I, I will say this is one thing is if I had known about this history of American comics and 6 panel strip, I would have encouraged the theater that produced my plays to license it from you to put in our programs.
Oh, awesome.
This
Well,
is I love this.
I do have prints of that, which a friend of mine, it ended up being a very convoluted project, but a friend of mine in Portugal did really nice lithographic offset prints of that poster,
Oh,
which I still have a bunch of. So I should probably put that back on my website as being for sale
you
now that it's
should.
out in the
That's
book.
I
But
think
Yes.
this is
I,
a
I
lovely
would buy one for my buddy Mark. So if they pop up on your website, like drop me a line.
all right, cool. Yeah,
Um,
well, yeah. I mean,
but
that's
also I'll say,
is
Mark, you need to collect the 4 color trilogy in like a hardcover, and that's what you should license it for.
yeah. I mean, it sounds like it covers kind of that because it really, that assignment. That's what an interesting about that comic is that it has constraints coming from very different directions. It was
right.
Yeah.
actually commissioned as an illustration for a university magazine for Colgate, and they
Oh,
had an article
man.
Okay.
about the history of American comic books. So I had the
Right.
kind of these classic constraints of I had a deadline, I had a format, a page size. It was like a half page, it was pretty generous. And I had
Mhm.
I had to write about, I had to find an illustration that would express not the whole history of comics in the world, which would have been even more overwhelming, but
Right.
specifically it was about action comics up until the present day sort of graphic novel era.
Right.
And it was the art directors were actually like, "What? Maybe you could do it as a comic." And that was like, "All right, that's great." And then I was able
Mhm.
to bring in my, you know, list of like constraints I wanted to play around with, and I had this thing of having that repeated structure in each panel where it's the
Yeah.
same
Right.
composition, which I have, other cartoonists have done, including Robert Crumb's history. Actually, the title is a bit of a reference to it. The history of what's it called? History of
Yeah.
America in 6 panels,
Yeah.
something like that. The one where it's like
I
a
think
country, it's like a bucolic field that slowly gets turned into like a hellhole of late 70s pollution and overdevelopment. But
right.
yeah, so that was like both levels of constraints coming together. So that was really gratifying. And it's probably, it might be my single
Yeah.
most seen
Crumb did
comic
use
page.
12 panels,
Mm.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go. So this is 6 panels, going from roughly, they're sort of fictionalized versions of kind of Superman action comics when they're still
Right.
fighting like bank robbers, up until like a riff on Jimmy Corrigan, like Chris Ware
Right.
and Daniel
Right. Right.
Clowes, Ghost World character in the background.
Yeah.
So yeah, when that came out in 2012 and Tumblr was still a thing, it got shared a lot on Tumblr. At one point, somebody cropped it vertically like it is in the book, actually.
Mhm.
But they did it wrong. They got the panels out of order, so it's not. So I had to like track down. People were really nice about it. Like I managed to find the person who'd done that, and he's like, "Oh, my bad," and he reposted it, and he's like, "Hey, that other one's fucked up. Don't share it. Share this one." But yeah, that one got a lot of likes.
Yeah, that's it was it was just like a little moment when I was reading the book and I
Yeah.
was like, oh, this is like uh with again, not to talk about my own work because nobody cares about that. But
Again, no, A, people do care.
Yeah, this is
B,
very
yeah,
relevant.
part
I
of why
mean,
you're
but
here, Mark, is the experience that you bring.
but like it was just like I was like, oh, it was like something that hit me square in the square in the feels, I guess. I was just like,
Hmm.
this is super cool. And the I just uh, I loved the choices you made. I thought were all really interesting and really cool. I mean, it just really, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool. And your Jimmy Corgan is spot on.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. No, I'd forgotten that one. So thank you for bringing it up, Mark.
Yeah, yeah.
Because among other things, it does remind me of um one of our early guests who's become a regular and a friend is Bob Sikoriak. And
Oh,
like,
sure.
well,
Yeah.
he does it longer form. This is what he does. He
Yeah.
takes
Yeah.
like other people's styles and sometimes adapt. I mean, one of my favorite books out there is Constitution Illustrated, which
Hmm.
I maintain. We need to send a copy to every member of Congress so that
Hmm.
they have no excuse for not having read it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Bob's great, and he's a friend, and we're definitely like
Yeah.
I consider us sort of fellow travelers in this sort of
Yeah.
particular
No, you
journey
guys
of
definitely.
experimenting with comics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've brought up enough of the comic strip type stuff and people that we've already done comic strip clubs on. We did a Harriman, we did a Roy
Mm.
Crane, that sort of thing. That I gotta like I'll nudge you and say, come join our quarterly comic strip club with Bob Crumb and Carl Krumholtz and Jonathan Bayless because you'd fit right in.
All right, yeah, remind me when you do it.
Um, but yeah, I have absolutely enjoyed this beyond belief. I never know when I get to talk to the people that it's like I have so many thoughts running through my head about what I want to say and what I don't want to sound dumb about and whatnot, whether or not I'm gonna like put my foot in my mouth. And I feel like I haven't. I feel like you've
Well,
also had a
mainly
good
because mainly
time
because
and
Mark asked
that's
all the questions, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
Mark was here. Well, that's part of the planning.
I asked,
um
you can't put that on me. I asked all the questions that probably would have been answered if I'd read the explanation section at
Yeah,
at
but
the end of the
but the
book.
book's not even out yet. So when my mom
I
is
know,
listening
but
later, she will need that because she can't read it yet.
I
I'm
I
I'm really
I
glad to know that. I'm really glad to know that you read it without looking at the back matter and found that it held up because that's sort of like going, it's a concern. Short story collections are a hard
yeah,
sell.
yeah.
Comics even more so, I think. They just
I
don't tend
think
to catch
less and
on. So
less
I really thought
now,
about how to present this in a way
but
that's
yeah,
like has a fighting chance. Yeah, I do mean it primarily as my creative work, and I hope that people read it as short stories. They're kind of all
right,
over the place, but I think they hold up well. It's really like all killer no filler. There are a couple things that ended up on the cutting room floor that I think are pretty good comics, but I just really wanted to foreground what I really think is the
right.
best stuff I've done.
Oh no,
Um,
I truly, I think there was there's a couple of pieces in here that I thought were magnificent, and I could probably sit, like even if like I knowing that you're about constraints and things like that, I actually just was like, I don't even care. The narrative was so great that I didn't,
Right.
Thank you.
it wasn't, it didn't make a like puzzling it out. I mean, I'm sure if I reread it 3 or 4 times, I'd
Right.
figure it out, but
I
I was just,
think, I mean,
but it's, I think that what I would say to anybody who would be looking at your work and maybe be put off or scared by this idea of the because there is a puzzle aspect to it that
Hmm.
some people might not that is not it's not something that it there's a there's a real danger when you write something that has niche elements, shall we
Yeah,
say,
I'm sure.
that it's like when I was again when I was working on those plays, I'm uh, every time we would do a reading or a workshop, my first question would be, is it too inside baseball?
Yeah,
Is this creating a barrier to somebody who doesn't have an intimate relationship with it
sure.
to understand it? And this, like your work, what is magnificent is it doesn't. It opens up itself and allows everyone in, and then that makes it fun to start figuring out what the the con I'm going to say conceit. That's probably not the right
Hmm.
word,
Oh,
but
that's fine. I can see works. Yeah.
yeah, what the conceit is. But I mean, like for example, the very last story, The Others,
Hmm.
is a magnificent narrative. I
Oh,
like
thank you.
it. It was truly moving for me, and I loved, uh, and that may be a in in my mind, that might be something that you've sort of inserted yourself into as the cartoonist at the end, but maybe not. I don't know, but I didn't really care
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
because
leaving
it
that
was,
open.
yeah. And I thought it was a beautiful narrative, and there's so many things in here that are beautiful narratives. The things that uh, for myself, I like, opening up things to various different people and different modes of life and people who live in different, uh, experiences.
Hmm.
I thought like this is just going to be like, hey, remember, it was great. But the office, the U.S. Post
Hmm.
Office, that narrative did not go where I thought it was going to go,
Hmm.
and I thought it was about exposing choices and people and things that like most people would never imagine themselves being involved with, and I got so involved with it. I thought it was beautiful. Just as a sales point, I couldn't, to anyone who's listening, I think that Matt's work is beautiful, and I think this book is beautiful, and I think it's it's beautiful to just experience his narrative, and it's also beautiful to experience as something that you can dig into and explore and find the little conceits and tricks and games that you can play to figure it out. I just think it's magnificent.
Wow. Thanks a lot.
And
That's super gratifying to hear.
yeah.
Especially, and
I mean,
you're one of the first like people I've talked to who doesn't really know my work and is seeing this for the first time. So that's really
well, I mean,
encouraging
I
to
did
hear.
read Ex Libris, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, and I would say the same thing about Ex Libris.
Hmm.
I was, yeah, because I
Which will
think
be reprinted next spring, by the way. It's still there are a few copies
Fantastic.
floating around out there, but it's basically out of stock. But we're
Right.
going to reprint it with Uncivilized, and it'll be out back in bookstores. So probably do a little relaunch
yeah,
in the spring. So maybe that'll be a good opportunity to have another chat at that point, maybe.
Oh,
I would
I
love
won't
that. I
argue.
mean, like,
Yeah.
because yeah, I will just stop because I could enthuse about that book as
Well, I
well.
want
But
to enthuse for a second just because you reminded me of something. I did read the back matter and I actually encouraged Mark to read it eventually. I like what he did and I did something similar where I'd read the story and I would spend time with it before I'd go read the
Hmm.
back part. Um, and that's the drawn onward is the one that like really because before I even went to the back, it was another one of those aha moments, right?
Right.
Because particularly because I normally would have seen the palindrome in the title and didn't even
Right.
see it there. Um, I read it front to back, and I picked up enough on what was going on that I literally read it back to front,
Uh-huh.
and then I moved it for read it from the middle forwards, and then from the middle backwards,
Yeah.
and I loved it. And I picked up that they were moving through time differently, and but I still couldn't like put my finger on the constraint.
Hmm.
I loved it.
Yeah.
To me, it was this cool little like not quite time travel story
Right.
because and like red alert. Spoilers coming up an hour and a half into the podcast. If you haven't read the book and you don't want this ruined, like go buy it and then
the
come back
book
for
isn't
it.
out yet.
Yeah.
You shouldn't spoil it.
Well, it's one story in the book. I don't feel like I'm spoiling it,
Yeah.
and I'm not giving
Go
details
go
of what's
pre-order the
going on in
book
the
while
story.
we're talking about this
Right,
next part.
right. Um, it so in my head it's like, oh, so he took the idea of one person's moving forward in time and one person's moving backwards in time, and that's just really cool and heartbreaking and beautiful and whatnot. And it still hadn't like hit me, and then I flipped to the back and it said palindrome. I'm like,
Yeah.
ah.
Well, and I got permission from my friend Tom Motley to include this very little short strip that he did years ago, which was part of the initial inspiration for this work. He has a strip he used to do called Hector that ran on the
Yeah,
Brooklyn Rail, and it's got a similar kind of riff on these characters operating in two different timelines.
right.
Um, and if you go on YouTube, you can find these various visualizations of, Bach wrote a bunch of the
Mhm.
Kankrazan, which is the musical form, and you can find
Okay.
some kind of dorky but cool. It's sort of like 90s, digital animation of like showing the sheet music layering and
Mhm.
twisting onto itself into a kind of Mobius strip. Because you can also visualize it as a kind of Mobius strip, which would be another way to go with that for another story.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I could keep talking about this story by story. I have a feeling that this is going to wind up as a book club book eventually. But
Uh,
my
in terms of the
my
back matter and people who are interested in learning about that kind of stuff, I wanted to plug also I started a Substack over the
you
summer.
literally just read
All
my
right,
mind.
good, thank you.
Yes, Matt, and I haven't explored it deeply yet because he set up a Substack that's totally. I've explored
And
it enough
it's
to know that I'll be exploring it more.
very much
It's
in the mode of this book. I didn't. It's more in tandem with the book than necessarily just. It's not just a promotional thing for the book, although currently I am sharing a lot of stuff. But it's called
right.
"Build Your Own Labyrinth: Constraints and Creativity." And so a lot
Well,
of the
what?
posts I'm doing currently, a lot of the posts I'm doing are kind of expanded versions of the back matter in this book, and also the kind of afterward where I talked about my history with Ulipo, and we haven't even talked about Ubapo, which is the comics official offshoot of this French literary group that are friends of mine that I've collaborated with when I lived in France. And so yeah, so that Substack is a great place if you want to be in touch with me and support my work. There is a paid tier as well, but it's also mostly free stuff where I'm just sharing constraints, more kind of like essays and comics than kind of newsletter type of stuff about events, although there will be that stuff on there as well as my book hits the world in the coming months.
Right. And where I'll add, because I'm a teacher, it shows that you are too. The way you write about this stuff,
Yeah.
some, I mean, and when you alluded to having had bad art teachers in high school, my wife, who's now a phenomenal art teacher, also had bad art teachers in
Mhm.
high school. So I know all about bad art teachers. And unfortunately, they pop up more than in some other subjects because it's a common way for artists who haven't managed to make money as artists to go make money. And like your average administrator doesn't know the difference between a good art teacher and a bad art teacher.
Yeah, well, it's a
Um,
hard thing to codify teaching creativity, and
right.
what that even means. So even good
So,
art, and a good artist doesn't make necessarily a good teacher.
right.
It's
Right.
something I've
Yeah,
really worked on
absolutely.
and thinking about how to talk about this stuff. And I've gone through several, moments of self-doubt and kind of rethinking how I approach stuff. Um,
But
currently I'm
that
not teaching in a school. I do kind of workshops here and there.
right.
I do some stuff with Sequential Artist Workshop, which is Tom Hart's online comic
But
school, including a
but
class on constraints, which we don't have a date
right.
yet, but I'll be doing that again in March. So if you're on my Substack, you'll get that news
Right.
when it drops.
But again, where I was going with this is that like it's clear that you've thought about how to teach and how to explain the things that you do and
Hmm.
how to encourage other people. And I not only do I appreciate that for any teachers or librarians out there listening, and I know that I have teachers and librarians listening. Um, you want to be looking at this Substack just for ideas for activities to do with your kids.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. And that is again, that's another reason why the book included with this back matter was
mhm.
with specifically with teachers in mind. And really, if you're just someone who's interested in work with constraints, it's a great starting point to pick up
Yeah.
some ideas. I say numerous times in the book that these ideas are not proprietary. I don't have any intellectual property rights on these constraints. These are
Yeah.
things that
That
anyone can
that re
use.
that reminds me of I've got one final question that is my typical final question, and I'm coming up on that because I know we're hitting our 2 hours, and I don't want to keep people forever. Mark's been so busy lately. I'm afraid he's going to pass out on us. Um, but when we were talking about the 99 ways to tell a story,
Hmm.
one of the things, and you brought up 22 panels, and 22 panels is it was Wally Wood's hack.
Yeah,
If I can't come up with something quick,
right.
pick a panel, move on. Um,
And can I say
I know.
quickly, it's one of the few, sometimes people ask me, what do you wish you'd done differently for 99 Ways to Tell a Story? And the one thing that I really kicked myself, I can't believe it didn't occur to me to do a 22 panels that always work version of the 99 Ways to Tell a Story,
Oh, that would be
panel
awesome.
story would have been
I
great.
Nice.
love
But
putting the two together.
yeah,
That's fantastic.
Um, eh, eh, One of the things that I've meant to do with that book, because I'm certain that they're out there, and I just haven't had the time or energy yet, but you know them more intimately. So I'm curious if you've come across times where you're reading something and go, oh, this is one of my ways to tell a story. This
so like an
page is
actual approach. I can't say that
where it's not necessarily like frame for frame or a complete rip, but like you can go, oh, this is very much this layout that I used or that
Mhm.
layout that I used as part of a scene in another comic.
I don't think I've ever spotted. I would love for people to share swipe files if anyone has suspicions about this. But and again, I would be honored to
Yeah,
observe
and that
this
that was the
somewhere.
follow-up
But
question. Would you feel like, hey, you're taking my work, or would you feel
yeah,
like that was what it was for?
right. I think it would have to be, in that book, obviously there are 99 different ways to tell a story, and a lot of them are kind of conventional, like different point of
Right.
view, first
Hmm.
person point of view. And I wouldn't see a first person comic and say, hey, they stole my idea from 99 ways to tell a story.
Right.
But there are some more particular ones that, maybe I would, if I saw someone using that idea, I might identify it and like, oh, that's cool. They took that idea and ran with it. Um, but more often what I've heard from people, and not just cartoonists, but, uh, you know, writers and filmmakers who have that book is that it's almost like like Brian Eno's oblique strategy cards or something. When they're stuck on
Hmm.
something, they pull out my book and they flip through it. And it just kind
Right.
of gets them jazzed up and like, oh, you could do
Right.
this, you could do that.
Right.
And sort of the general notion of exploring different ways to solve problems
Well,
creatively.
and that's where I've fallen in love with cartoonists like yourself. Karen Green is the one that told us to use Ex Libris for our first book club. She
Oh,
also
great.
turned me on to a book called I think it's Mr. Impossible. Uh, uh, European superhero, mostly one
Oh,
page stuff,
un,
or
un,
Mr.
un,
Invincible. The
Mr.
the guy
Invincible.
that
Yeah. Oh, that's
yeah,
great stuff.
Mr.
Yeah, for
Invincible,
sure.
where his superpower is that he can move between panels.
You can control the powers of the comics page. Yeah, that's great
Right.
stuff.
Um, and it's just, so so rarely do you have people that are completely talented in every aspect of storytelling. So I appreciate when there are people who are talented at and really focus on the structural type stuff because I know how much that winds up informing other people's work. That person that has the thing that they want to get out and they don't know how to express it because they just haven't managed to think of the structural conceit to manage to get that idea out, but then is
Hmm.
reading a Mr. Invincible or a 99 Ways to
Right.
Tell a Story or a Six Treasures of Spiral and go, oh, I think I know how to do it now. Um, the teacher in me just adores that. So I thank you for that. And then my final question, my favorite question to ask everybody, if you come back on for anything other book club, you'll get asked it again because it's one of those things that changes. Tell me something you love, preferably a comic. Doesn't have to be if it's a book, movie, whatever, but something that you love that not enough other people have experienced, or at least those around you, and you need them to, so you have more people to talk about with it
Hmm.
or talk about it with.
Yeah. Uh, well, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. I will maybe
It
do a
doesn't
bit of
have
a
to be one.
maybe do a bit
Something.
of a self-serving one, which is some of my translation work I've been very proud of. And they're like I mentioned Edmond Baudouin earlier, who I think is is a major one of the major living cartoonists. And he's only had a few things published in English, and I've translated most of them. I did a short story for an anthology called Rosetta back in the early 2000s. And then this book, which I will offer as my choice, is called Piero, Piero. It came out in 2017,
I
I think, from New York Review Comics. Still in print, as far as I know, but has kind of like fallen between the cracks. It definitely like I got some really nice reactions from people when the book came out, fellow cartoonists, and it got a few good reviews. But it's a really moving, beautifully told childhood. It's like it's about his relationship with his brother growing up and his kind of
okay.
journey of self-discovery as an artist. Um, Drawn in a style that's actually not he's really known for really inky, brushy style, that the kind of stuff that Craig Thompson would be inspired by. This book, which he did for originally for a YA publisher in France, is drawn with like a rotring pen, like a sort of clean pen line. And it's amazing that he can pull that off too and have it be a completely integrated, beautiful drawing style. But it's just really, beautifully told, wonderfully observant. And I guess I'll add one other because it's in a similar vein, which is a book called The Zabim Sisters, Zabime. And that's another book that I translated, was published back in 2007, but I believe is still in print from First Second Books. And that was a Guadeloupean French-speaking author named Aristophane, like Aristophanes. Aristophane Boulon was his full name. He went to France. He actually lived in Angoulême and went to the art school there and started making these amazing comics. And the Zabim Sisters is kind of a day in the life of a bunch of girls living on a Caribbean island, Black Caribbean island, and having adventures, stealing mangoes from a neighbor's backyard and getting chased and meeting boys and getting up to trouble. And it's just like nothing happens and everything happens. It's an absolutely beautiful piece of visual storytelling. And the art is just incredible. It's really busy brush, sun dappled it's all black and white, as with Baudouin's work. So Zabim Sisters by Aristophane and Pierrot by Baudouin are two French comics that I happen to have translated, but partly because I think they're some of the great comics of the last 20 years. I encourage people to check out.
And now there's another thing that I'm going to want to talk to you about at some point, because I've tried really hard to have as many different people in comics on. We've had letterers on, we've had inkers on. I still need a colorist, but I also still want a translator.
Did that too. I've been a colorist and I've been a translator. I've been an editor. I've been a teacher. So you just
right. Well, no, well, yeah, but I mean, do you know Lion's Tooth in Milwaukee? The bookstore?
No.
It'd be one that you'd like.
Okay.
And your stuff would fit in. But one of the owners does Portuguese translations. She translated Love and Rockets for the Brazil market.
Oh, nice.
That sort of thing. So I've been meaning to have her on, and now I might try to get the two of you together and have two different translators that can talk about, because again, is as the word guy, I know how much language is such a funny thing to begin with. The number of times where it's hard to find the word in English, but then when there are, there are words in English that I know don't translate well to other languages. I know that there are languages or words in other languages that don't translate well to English.
Sure. All kinds of idioms and wordplay and double entendres and stuff.
Right. When you start getting into poetry or comics where there's a certain economy of word, but sometimes it's not even that. Like my favorite book ever, and the single biggest reason that I wish I had aptitude for language, because I wish I could read it in the original French, is The Little Prince. But only the Catherine Woods translation, because every translation since then has just sucked the life out of it.
Yeah.
That one had a sense of whimsy and a sense of playfulness that just is gone from the later translations.
Yeah. It's hard to pull out the whimsy of French writing in French is something that's very hard to capture in English. And not to throw my fellow translators on the bus, but there a number of like Raymond Queneau's novels have been translated into English. And when I read it, I can sort of see what they're trying to do, but it comes across as very like arch and like twee. Whereas in the French, it has a charming breeziness that that is hard to maintain. It's a really hard thing to pull off.
No, we're gonna have to drag you back from time to time. I hope that you've enjoyed your time.
Because, this has been fun.
Because I want to talk more.
I'd love to come back and talk about translation or whatever.
So for Mark Pracht and for Matt Madden, this has been 22 panels, and we will see you after the next page.
Hey guys, this is Tyler from 22 Panels. I'm here to tell you all about our Patreon. If you enjoy this show, please consider donating to our Patreon to keep this show going. We have many different tiers, all different levels to help you decide what's right for you. Okay, so get on out there to patreon.com/22panelspodcast.